Hey everybody, welcome to another Lean In Olympia. My name is Meg Martin. I'm the Executive Director for Interfaith Works. And Lean In Olympia is our bi-monthly show that tackles all kinds of issues at the intersection of humanity, belief, social justice. And we are super glad that you're here again today. Check out past episodes on our website at interfaith-works.org and on our YouTube channel, Interfaith Works Thurston County, and of course on our Facebook page. I'm very excited about my guest today. Welcome, Noha Mahgoub, the Senior Policy Advisor for Housing and Homelessness for the Governor's Office.
Thank you. It's good to be here. I appreciate you having me.
Yes. My first and most important question is, where did you get your jacket? Because I love it.
Thank you. I think I got it at Macy's
Cool.
a few years ago. I appreciate it. No, it's my, when I'm feeling a little, I don't know, sassy, fancy, this is a jacket. So I'm hoping to get a little energy from me today.
Yeah, I got some very good advice from a local political celeb, I guess, Anna Schlecht. You might or might not know her, but she said never underestimate the power of a blazer.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah,
that's a good just like rule of thumb for all of us.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for being here today. Do you think you could just start and talk a little bit more about what your role at the governor's office is specifically?
Yeah, I'll certainly try. So, I'm the advisor for housing and homelessness, like you said, and to me, I kind of think about those two things separately. Obviously, there's a lot of overlap. So on the housing front, I'm focusing on, do we have enough housing? Is it at every income level that we need? Across the state, all our needs are very different, urban, rural, east side of the state, west side of the state, et cetera. So always thinking about supply and kind of that, just like brick and mortar side of housing and development and permitting and all that stuff. And the other side is homelessness. And that's a lot more, in my mind, service focused on what are the needs in our communities? How are we doing? To be honest, we know that there's a huge need out there that we at the state and with our local partners aren't quite able to get to and to meet. And so knowing kind of those two things are part of my portfolio, then it becomes, well, how are we dealing with them? And so I'm working on anything from implementation of bills with our wonderful agencies and their staff as we're trying to stand up new programs. I'm taking meetings just when folks want to say, hey, I have an idea or we have a problem. We want to talk to somebody at the governor's office about it. I take a lot of those. Right now we're in the legislative session, as you know, so it's a lot of working on governor request bills and just partnering with folks as we try to, get as many of the good bills passed as we can. So day to day and kind of season to season, my job's a little bit different, but ultimately it's just trying to meet with people, understand the issues, and work in a collaborative way to try to get all the various needs of our state met.
Yeah. So your portfolio is from luxury housing to 0 to 30% low income housing.
That's correct. I mean, although I will say there's not a lot of people calling me about luxury housing. I think they're doing okay. But yeah, that's correct. It's
like when you're looking at what are the needs of like housing inventory
Right.
and all that kind of stuff, you're looking at that full spectrum.
That's correct. And we got really lucky. There was a great Representative Strom Peterson had a bill a couple years ago, House Bill 1220, and I got to be honest, we're really lucky that passed because that kind of tasked the Department of Commerce to work with our local partners in the Office of Financial Management to really map that out and give us very strong data on what are the needs now and what's the projected need for the next 20 years. And so I think those numbers have just started. I think they're draft numbers right now that just came out end of last year, but that's really giving us kind of a roadmap on understanding exactly what the need is. And the numbers are huge across the income spectrum. But in order to solve problems, you really have to be able to quantify and understand so much of what they are. So it's going to be a heavy lift, but at least we kind of know what we need to do.
Is that's called, what's that housing report called? And it's coming out of Commerce, right?
So it's kind of like
it's like a housing needs assessment.
That's correct.
Okay.
So for any of the cities that do and counties that do like the comprehensive planning is required in the Growth Management Act, there's a housing element attached to that. And we're, the bills and kind of what the changes in the legislature are really requiring new things in that element so that cities and counties are planning adequately for the needs in their communities. And that includes things like 0 to 30%, 30 to 50, 50 to 80. And those are ways those are targets we haven't really, we know we haven't adequately provided for. And this kind of says we have to. And I think that's really important and a great step.
Yeah, we were able to, I sit on the Affordable Housing Advisory Board for the governor's office, and we were able to review that. And I think that I hear so much in the community that people are like, there's just, without that kind of full picture of what are the needs and what is it going to take to get there, I think that a lot of people fill in the blanks of either it's getting so much worse or why are we putting so much money into this already when we don't see the results. And so I'm really excited for that information to be out, because I think those of us that have been embedded in this issue for a long time are like, we are missing the mark on the scale of this every single time. And so that's why we can't ever get our head above water fast enough for the community to really feel like the solutions that we know are working are actually working, because it feels like we're losing ground all the time. So I think that this is going to be a really cool tool for communities to be able to tell that story more.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, your point about, we put hundreds of millions of dollars into, our housing and homelessness response. And until we truly have an adequate number of places for people to live that they can afford, it's always going to be visible to us.
Yeah.
And what we need is, just like you said, if our communities can understand the deficit, then every year as we make progress, folks can say, okay, I'm buying into this because we're doing something about the need that we know we can quantify that we have. And so I'm hopeful for the future, but we also know that the deficit is so large, this is going to take us a while, and we have to make huge investments now.
Yeah. And this is like a whole nother episode that we could run, but I feel like we have systemically disinvested for the last 50 years in affordable housing and in having basic needs met for people. And so I think sometimes people are like, what, we're putting all this money in, and it's like, no, we're just slowly trying to put money back in that had been systematically cut out for the last 50 years. And I feel like it's going to take us at least that long of reinvestment into the solutions that we know to see any major progress. And yeah, and it's a tough job to try to keep communities feeling hopeful and engaged and like progress is happening. But I'm wondering, it seems from the outside, from where I sit, that the governor has considered investing in some really unprecedented ways to address the housing crisis this session particularly. Are you also seeing that? Is that true? What are some of the hot investments in housing that are happening right now?
I think that is true. And I will start by saying the legislature over the past probably decade has made significant investments, and they've really prioritized housing and homelessness, and they're operating in capital budgets. But we know we are hundreds of thousands of units behind, the majority of which are affordable units. And so I'm really proud of what the governor has submitted to the legislature, which is a $4 billion proposal to say we have to get out ahead of our deficit. And we know that unless we do, the budgets as they stand right now, they just don't have capacity to meet the need of us really dialing up the number of units we are getting built. And this referendum basically says, here's $4 billion, and across the whole spectrum of affordable housing to market rate, we are going to infuse over 6 years, this capital to really get us on track and have the resources meet some of what we know the need is that just cannot be captured in any other way that is on the table right now. So I'm really proud of that. I think the governor's right. And, some of the funding for that goes from anywhere from the Housing Trust Fund and really dialing up that number to, transit-oriented development and making sure that we're investing money where there's already infrastructure, where we can build way up. It's not only is it great for housing, but it's great for the environment when you're reducing, the vehicle miles traveled and those sorts of things. So I think the governor's proposal is well thought out, and it really, again, it aims to just infuse resources where we know we need them in a tool that is available and legal to us here in the state to try to start moving us in the right direction with the amount of units that we need to build.
Yeah. So for people that are not like really in the know of how the legislature works, when you say that the governor has put this proposal forward to the legislature, what is that like? I'm like, how does that work then?
Sure.
Is it like a series of many different bills that are all individually negotiated, or is it like how does that get negotiated?
Yeah, so it's, you'll see a couple, there's like a bond bill and kind of the and I have to tell you, I'm not an expert on this, but
Yeah.
but essentially there's a bill, there might be two, that goes through the legislative process through, and just like any other bill does. So there's hearings. They've both been heard in both the Senate and the House. They get exact like any other bill, and then they have to go through the legislative process. It needs a simple majority to pass. And then if that happens, it then gets placed on a ballot. It could be, the legislature can decide if they want to do it during the primary or a general or call a special election. But then the voters get to decide if the state gets to then use that authority to issue those bonds. And so there's a legislative process for it, and there's also a voter process for it, for the voters to approve it if they think it's a good idea and a good use of state dollars, state resources.
Okay, cool. And the bond would be like a 3-year bond, is that what you said? Or
So we would spend as the proposal is now, it would be spent over 6 years, but I believe as the bonds are sold, it's like 20 or 30 years. And I apologize, I'm not
oh, that's okay.
super
Yeah.
expert on the mechanisms. There's smarter people than me, luckily, that also work for the Office of Financial Management. So
Yeah. So, I mean, you are very smart. You know a lot, and I appreciate you sharing with us about it. I guess that so then for community members, if this were to get through the legislative process, we could expect to see on our ballot that there would be some kind of housing initiative that would be a bond, and that will need support from the community, of course, and for people voting positively for it.
Correct.
For it to get passed. Okay, cool. Can you talk a little bit about the right-of-way initiative?
Sure.
I'm wondering I guess maybe just let's give an overview first of what the right-of-way initiative is for anyone who doesn't know.
Absolutely. So in the last legislative session, the governor and the legislature worked together to create kind of a pot of money that said, we have a lot of people that are, unsheltered, living outside in state-owned rights of way, and we want to be able to coordinate to address that and help those people transition into really a safer place that actually meets their individual needs for shelter. And so the Department of Commerce, the Washington State Patrol, and the Washington State Department of Transportation kind of came together, and then in Thurston, Pierce, King, Snohomish, and Spokane counties have worked with kind of either government or nonprofit providers or county providers, all of the above, kind of different combinations in each county, to identify sites, hire staff to do, or contract with staff, to kind of do some outreach. And then we've worked to resolve sites as housing has come on board. And so in some instances, we're leasing spaces. In some instances, we're buying buildings as we contract with providers. And, I think we've had varying levels of success county to county. And to be honest, I think such a big part of that is there housing for someone to transition to that is appropriate for them, that is affordable to them, and in which we can make sure that there's staff available to provide services as needed. And so in places where we've been able to acquire places for folks to go, I think we've had great success. And in places where it's been a little bit harder to maybe site some places or acquire or wait to build, I think the results have been, I think they're on the way. And I'm really proud of the work in terms of how we've really tried to take an individualized approach to meet people's individual needs. If I offer someone housing that doesn't meet their need, I think it's a really fair question on how we offer them anything.
Right.
And so we've really worked hard with our partners, and full credit to them, to the folks on the ground that have had to do the really hard work of outreach, building relationships, ensuring that folks feel that trust and feel like you're not just going to move me from one place to another. You are going to try to see me as a human being and move me to a place if I accept that works for me. So that's what we've tried to do. I think we've learned a lot in this first year of working on this, and my hope is that we can continue to improve on the program here in the next couple of years, and bring in new partners and improve our partnerships currently, and continue to really serve people in the way that they deserve.
Yeah. And I think what's really interesting about that initiative is just how the Department of Transportation and Department of Commerce, I feel like, although there are typically really separate end goals for things, they've come on this alignment of people need to be offered housing before they can be removed from those encampments.
Right.
And I think that that's what a lot of housing advocates have asked for in the past. And so I've seen this as like a pretty interesting trial run of how could that actually work?
Right.
That when we are addressing encampments in our community or unsheltered homelessness in our community, what does it look like to offer viable options for housing? And our shelter is a partner in this as well. And we've seen that some of the folks that have come from right-of-ways are a lot of people who have been most disconnected from services and from resources. And the right-of-ways are really dangerous places to camp, and people have experienced a lot of dangerous things there. And so it's, I have a lot of feelings about how it's gone in certain ways, but I think overall it's a really interesting roadmap that I hope could incentivize other initiatives in the future. And you said before we got started that there's an effort to expand that to county and city right-of-ways as well.
Correct.
For this session. Can you speak to that just a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of part of what we talked about in that kind of learning and having the program evolve. And so right now we're focused on state-owned rights of way for a very serious reason. It's extremely an unsafe place to be. But really anywhere where you're outside and unsheltered is an unsafe place to be. And so as we've evolved and really listened to our partners at the local level, they've said, we've also got we could use some more partnership in some other spaces where we do have encampments or people living outside where it's just not safe. And so I think we've tried to listen to that and say, okay, like, we've really appreciated the partnership so far. We would love to grow the partnership. Let's try to do that together. So we're hoping to move in that direction. I mean, obviously it's now, we had that in our proposed budget for the governor. And, as we work with budget writers, we're going to hope to strengthen that language and kind of listen to our partners and see if the language will work for them. But we'll kind of find out what the final product of that is when session's over. But yeah, we are moving in that direction. And I think if we're going to address this, this is a statewide problem. It's everywhere outside, and so the more we can kind of coordinate and work together, I think the better we'll be able to serve our kind of shared residents.
Yeah. Do counties and cities seem to be on board with this idea, or are there barriers to that conversation moving forward?
I think there are some counties, just kind of like everything, right? There are some counties that are totally on board, and there are some that aren't. And I think this, to be honest, what we're facing as a state are kind of different philosophies sometimes on what the best course of action can be. And, as we were talking about, our philosophy on, especially with this initiative, is really outreach focused, really intensive on the building the relationship, really knowing who's on site, and that takes, not only does that take time, it takes significant investment.
Yeah.
And as we grow the program, we have to keep kind of that in mind with how much are we going to be appropriated to do this work in the budget, and then asking our partners to also come to the table with resources as well. So I think we're going to, I'm hopeful that for folks that do want to work with us, that there will be enough folks that want to do that. But I think sometimes it can be a challenge just based on the way that we're trying to do the work and who might agree with kind of our philosophy on that.
Yeah. Yeah, because there's still a pretty strong sentiment that, of this question of, do we provide services and housing, or do we, send people to jail, or kind of take more of a criminalization law enforcement pathway? Is that the main kind of place where things divide?
I think that's one of the main. I think another thing we're really struggling with is citing, to be really honest with you. I think everybody agrees across the state, across any kind of political spectrum, people want to help folks who are unsheltered. There's no question. But the minute you say, well, where is this site going to go where we transition people from being outside to inside, that's where a lot of the barriers tend to come up. And so I've heard a lot of things. Honestly, half of them I wouldn't even say out loud to repeat. But some of the stuff is very much like, well, these aren't our people. They're coming from somewhere else.
Right.
And ultimately, these are our neighbors. At least that's my opinion and fundamental belief, is that, folks, these are us. This is our neighbor. These are our neighbors, our community members. And so when it comes down to siting, I think that's where we sometimes have the biggest philosophical difference on,
Yeah.
Where should people have the right to be, and where are the resources that are going to help them should they need it. And oftentimes it's not way out somewhere else. It's in the community that they grew up in.
Yeah.
And so not wanting to, I don't think we want to separate folks from their communities while we say we're helping them. Do you know what I mean?
Oh yeah. I I feel like yeah, just so much of what we've had to overcome in order to get our services to the place that they are right now has been that, that kind of fundamental thing of we know that people need help and we know that people need to be somewhere, but not here, not here, not here so much, not here,
Right.
And so then you're kind of left like literally where then? And that's why we're in this issue in the first place. And I think that, I've talked a lot over the years about what the numbers show in terms of people who are from here, and that if you were to come up to me any day of the week and ask me where I'm from Denver 7 days of the week, right? But if you ask that next question, how long have you lived here? I've lived here for 15 years.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like we often see that only about 1% to 2% of folks have been here for a year or less. And the vast, vast majority of everyone has been here 5 years or longer who are trying to access services in Thurston County. But there's this it's, that thing about how if you feel like something is a certain way, someone being like, but this is what the numbers show, is not really very useful, right?
Right.
And so I guess just to kind of expand on that, how big of a barrier to implementing solutions is community pushback?
I mean, I might say it might be the biggest.
The biggest,
It might be the hardest one, because it's just like you said, folks are coming not from a place of ill will, but from a place of fear. What is this going to mean? And I think we have such a disconnect between who we think is outside and unsheltered versus who's actually outside and unsheltered. And I think that what I would hope for in our communities as we work on these types of things of siting, it should be less of a no, and it should be more of like a how can we all work on this together?
Yeah.
So whatever I'm scared of or whatever my needs are, there's a process to address those things, because the more I know, the better I'll feel. Because we all also fundamentally, and maybe I'm wrong about this and I'm just an optimist, we want to help each other.
Mm-hmm.
We just have to figure out what that means and how to do that in a safe way. And I don't for a second believe that our unsheltered population means I'm going to be more or less safe if there's a shelter next door. I don't fundamentally believe that, but I know some people do. And if I just say, well, you're wrong, to your earlier point, that's not going to get us there. And so I think we need a better process as we kind of communicate what we're trying to do and why we're trying to do it, so that folks can feel engaged. And it's not just I don't feel safe. It's here's how I would feel safe, and recognizing that we can meet everybody's needs at the same time. We are capable of both, and everybody deserves both. And the other piece I'll say to that is we're not just having a hard time with siting for social service needs or settings. Right now we're trying to say duplexes should be allowed in neighborhoods, and people are saying, nope, we don't even want, everybody wants affordable housing, but people also sometimes are resistant to more dense options in their neighborhood. So I think we're seeing this across a spectrum, on anything we try to do to kind of address our affordable housing crisis, to address our homelessness crisis, where we just have a lot of resistance that I think if we drill down to it might even be contrary to how folks feel deep down on wanting to help, but just feeling like it has to happen somewhere else.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that it, from where I sit, I'm like, and then so much of the onus often feels like it's on the shoulders of the provider or the developer or whatever who's trying to implement the thing. And we've always come from a grassroots community organizing perspective, but it does get hard when, you know, I've seen now time after time after time after time when we have services in all different kinds of neighborhoods. We've done it pretty much everywhere at this point in the Olympia area. That every issue from that community then gets attributed to our presence being there.
Right.
And so there's this nuance to it of, we know that working with folks who are in crisis all the time doesn't always look pretty. It's not always easy. There are undesirable things that occur when somebody doesn't have four walls and a closed door to do their undesirable things in, like we all have. And so it's not a matter of people being wrong that issues do arise.
Right.
I think that it's just like, how do we get on the same page about the reality of what we're up against in our communities and what it's going to take, and that it's going to mean that some of us might have to face some discomfort in order to address this big issue. But the reality, I think, too, is that we're all facing discomfort already.
100%.
Every time that we see somebody that's struggling on the streets, I think, to your point, like, the vast majority of people feel like that shouldn't be happening because of what's best for that person, not because, I don't know. I just like, it just seems like until we can figure out that piece of it, I don't know how we really implement solutions on the scale that we need to.
Yeah, I think it's going to be, I completely agree. I think it's going to be really hard. And there are some things that give me a little bit of hope, right? Which is back to kind of what we started with, which was, you know, local jurisdictions have to start planning for this. They have to start planning for housing to meet every segment of the population. And this is part of it. These are, you know, this is part of what we have to plan for. And so I do think that, I hope that will help with siting as we move forward. And at the end of the day, I mean, I think we have to ask ourselves as a community and as a culture, is any of my discomfort worth someone sleeping outside?
Yeah.
And I would hope that the majority of us would say no, and then get to problem-solving mode on how can we move forward together.
Yeah.
I'm trying to remember who said it, and I think it was Representative Macri when we were working on some policies a couple of years ago, who said, like, people deserve to live where people live, right? Everyone deserves to have every opportunity to live in every neighborhood in our amazing, beautiful state. And so I want to get to the how versus the whether or not it's a yes or no. I just want to get to, like,
Right.
that's the conversation I want to have, is how can we make that so?
Right.
And I think we can do it. I think we just have to reframe the fundamental question.
Yeah. Yeah. I really like that. And I think that we do need to continue to believe that it's possible, because the reality is, like, there's no other option.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I know you've talked about a lot of what you're working on this session, but is there anything that you haven't talked about yet that you're particularly excited about?
Well, I think I briefly mentioned it, but I'm really excited about our transit-oriented development proposal. The governor has a bill that he's partnered with Senator Elias on, and it's really focusing on leveraging so much of our amazing transit infrastructure and investments that we've made over the last probably, 6 to 10 years, to, like, really ratchet up density where it makes sense to ratchet up density in a really meaningful way. So we're going to work through that process. Obviously, this session, I'm sure there'll be a few tweaks here and there, but it's just a really great, in my mind, way to really start adding units in a place where it makes sense to, right? People can utilize transit. It's good for the environment. There's a lot more housing that you can build where there's a ton of infrastructure. So I'm excited about that. I think that's the kind of, those are the kind of policies we need to, again, chip away at our housing deficit. So
Yeah.
I'm really excited. We've got a great permitting bill that we've partnered with Senator Mullet on, and really grateful for his partnership too, where we're saying like, hey, part of, we want to speed this up. We want to make sure that local jurisdictions have the tools and resources they need to help us do that. So we've got a bill that streamlines and kind of gives grant funding to help do that. So those are the things where you could see where we're trying to, in every step of the process, we're trying to help be part of the solution.
Yeah.
To address our kind of housing stock supply issue, and also like this legislature this year, people have come to work and with solutions on housing, and I'm really excited about them. I think, Representative Bateman has a great missing middle bill that we're really supportive of, that I'm really hopeful for this year, and I know she's working really hard on it. And so I think there's some really good stuff on housing, and then of course we'll keep working on the budget and trying to make sure that the investments line up where they should. But our partners are really committed, and so I'm hopeful that this session is going to be a really, really good year for housing.
That's awesome. What are some of the most effective ways that someone who cares about these issues can get involved? I mean, I think even for someone like me who's really pretty plugged into things, it sometimes feels like this mystery of what happens during legislative session. So how can people be most effective?
Well, I think, there's a lot of bills that are introduced, which I know can make it kind of hard to kind of follow along with what may be of most interest to you. But those of us that work in Olympia all the time, the members know us, they hear from us all the time. It's when folks, just community members, are able to come in, and not just in person. I mean, I think there's now like a remote testimony is available for folks, so you don't have to come in, because there's a lot of barriers why people can't take the day off and head to Olympia if you don't live here. But when our members, our elected officials, hear from community members on whether or not they're for or against a bill as it's being heard, it really is very impactful. And I know there might be skepticism about that, but I've worked in and around the legislature for almost a decade, and it's true. And so I would say follow the bills that are important to you. Follow them through the hearing process, and let them know how you feel about it. And even if you can't testify, you can always sign in pro or con. You can send members your testimony or your thoughts on a bill. And I can't tell you how often when I worked for the legislature, members would say, like, I haven't heard from anybody about this bill, right?
Right. So then to them, they're like, it doesn't have any traction.
It doesn't have any traction.
So even hearing from one or two people.
Yeah, is a huge deal, especially if you can connect with your own legislators from your district. And if you don't know how to find them, like leg.wa.gov is the website, and you can say, find my legislator, and you put in your address, it will connect you, and you can email them directly. You can call their office. And so there are a lot of ways to engage. And I would honestly say it's supremely important to do that. And then if you're ever kind of not sure where to start, if there are organizations or follow, they probably will have a legislative liaison that can also help you identify which bills are that you might have interest in. So I know it can seem intimidating and daunting, but they really do want to hear from you, and so do we. And so it's I take a lot of meetings with folks that just want to talk to somebody at the governor's office saying, I have some ideas and thoughts about this, or I want you all to know, and we take as many of those as we can. Yeah. And I know the legislators do too.
That's awesome. So I know that there's a couple of legislative advocacy days too, which was something I didn't really know about until I came to Interfaith Works. But the Faith Action Network has one coming up, as well as the Washington Low Income Housing Alliance, both happening in February. And so those are ways just for community members to look up their websites and to get registered for those events. I think the Washington Low Income Housing one is all virtual again this year, but I think the Faith Action Network one is a hybrid. So that's really good to hear, and I think it's a good reminder too, especially for people who are based in Olympia. There are times that I've gone up to testify and I only end up getting to say things for 1 minute, which can be hard, but also it means that you're only up there for 10 or 15 minutes. So it's something that can be doable for people. I'm just curious, this is off script a little bit, but I'm just curious, how did you get into, can you just tell us a little bit about your personal pathway to where you're at now?
Yeah, no, I'm happy to. I'm not supposed to be here. That's the short answer of it. I was a direct service social worker for a long time. I worked with parents in recovery. I worked with youth in foster care that were aging out. And when I went to go to graduate school, so I could try to learn how to kind of have a more systems-oriented approach to the work that I was doing, I had a good friend of mine, Mary Jane, who I met in the program. This is back when you would like choose a concentration. And I was just going to choose exactly what I was doing. And she said, like, you're being really lazy. And you're going to go into a concentration for work you've already done for years. You should really try something that will give you an opportunity. Like, you're paying all this money, go learn something. She said she was a lot nicer and more diplomatic, but so the thing that scared me the most was policy. And so I had this amazing opportunity for, I think you're a social worker too. So did you have to do a practicum as well? So Representative Tina Orwell has her master's in social work, and so she has a spot every year for somebody in that program to come be an intern for her for like whatever the 720 hours. So I met with her and I was totally freaked out, and she was amazing and said, like, yeah, let's do this. And so I just interned in grad school during the 2015 legislative session. And it completely changed my life, right? It was such an incredible experience. Rep Orwell, she shares her office with her intern. And so cool. All the meetings, the negotiations, the problem solving on bills, I got to be a part of all of that, which was such an incredible gift, honestly, that she gave me. And what I realized was like, oh, like, I kind of want to be here. I kind of want to work on this stuff. And mainly because when I looked around at that time, there were no social workers in those rooms. I was there obviously with a social worker and Rep Orwell, but for the most part, everybody negotiating on bills, everybody informing bills. There wasn't that lens that was there that was, in my mind, in my opinion, critically important. And so I got really lucky to have that experience. And then her seatmate, Representative Mia Gregerson, then needed a legislative assistant after that session. And so I think enough people hounded her to say, and she's like, okay. So I worked for her for 2 years. I cannot tell you the amount of mentoring I got from her, and ability to just be exposed to policymaking. And she really went above and beyond and giving me every opportunity to continue learning and growing. And so little by little, 2 years after that, I started working for the Senate Democratic Caucus doing policy work. And almost 5 years later, I go to the governor's office. So it's really just because a friend in grad school called me out and said, you should maybe think about something else. And I have to say, it's been really wonderful. It's been really hard. But I'm glad that there are folks bringing a certain lens. And I think it's made me want to make sure that I bring as many social workers in as possible to this space, because I think it's critically important that what we know to do when we're working on solving problems is saying who's impacted. We want to make sure that they're informing this policy. And I think my education helped me do that, and my experience helped me do that. And so hoping to continue as we go.
That's super inspiring to me as a social worker, because I feel like, I don't know, it's just really cool to see everybody's different pathways of how they got into policy. And I remember that I had my policy class in grad school, and my professor, Janet Lasko, was like, or I showed up and I was like, I think policy is BS. I don't think it matters. No one, like, whatever. You're really going to have to convince me, like I was some important person or something, but I'm like, you're really going to have to convince me, Janet, that policy matters. And she was like, okay, deal, And then it was in that class that I had an assignment that either we had to volunteer on a campaign or we had to do a public comment. And so I did my first public comment at City of Olympia, which is so funny that I'm talking about this because I'm doing a presentation tonight at City Council, and I haven't been there in a long time, but it was the first public comment. I did a 3-minute public comment about the importance of syringe exchange programs and harm reduction. And then it was the next week that I learned that there was a slate of quality of life ordinances that were getting passed that were going to restrict the use of public space for people who are experiencing homelessness. And I was like, well, I don't like that. I guess I'll go back. And then that was what started the whole trajectory of the shelter getting open. And the shelter was my capstone project for the MSW. And so It's just, I guess I was really hoping to have you here today to just share this message that things are happening and that getting involved does actually matter and can actually change things. So Janet Lasco, if you're watching.
Yeah, Mary Jane. If
You
you're
are
watching.
right.
Thank you.
And it's just, thank you. It's just really awesome to have you here today and talk about all this. Before we sign off, is there anything else that we left off or anything that you want the community to really understand about the housing crisis in Washington State?
Well, thank you for the opportunity. I mean, I think really good things are happening. We are making a lot of progress in meeting the needs of people and transitioning folks into housing that is stable and safe and that works for them, and that everybody deserves to have that opportunity. And I'm proud of us for moving in that direction. And we have to see this as a community responsibility. Mm-hmm. It's going to take all of us together to do this work. And as long as I think we can have that mentality, my hope and my plea is for all of us to see this as a community responsibility that we can do together. And the state will come in where it needs to come in, and the locals will come in where they need to come in. But this is for us. This is for our people. Mm-hmm. And I think if we can move in that direction, we're going to be okay. We're going to be able to get there.
Okay. You heard her. Ledge.gov. What is it?
Ledge.wa.gov.
Ledge.wa.gov. Find some bills that you support. Mm-hmm. Sign up to testify. Sign in pro or con, depending. There's lots of ways. And Ledge session runs through,
I think, April 23rd.
April 23rd. So it's a full session this year.
A long one this year, yep.
So we have more time to get involved. Noha, thank you so much. I know that you're like the busiest person in the world, so I super appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, no, thanks for this amazing opportunity to talk about what we're working on. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. Forever shout out to Porcupine Media for hooking us up with the setup, and stay tuned for more Lean In Olympias. Take care, everybody.